applications, WBS through facilitation of training sessions and workshops. In the oil and gas industry, we helped a prominent global oil company transition operational staff to a newly designed trading floor. In the commercial sector, we've supported the enterprise-wide rollout of a project for a very large multinational retailer. In the higher education sector, we've worked with a large Ontario college to redesign their project management curriculum to adapt it to an asynchronous teaching environment. That was initiated by the COVID-19 crisis or pandemic, and the effort there was around making the training engaging and to adapt it to an online delivery. And lastly, in the finance space, we've worked with stakeholders in workshops to collaboratively develop a corporate scorecard for their performance evaluation. Okay, so with that in mind, let's jump into the problem of training and timing. And before we do, I want to sort of draw everyone's attention to a few sobering facts about the state of training. So in 2018, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics found that companies with fewer than 100 employees gave only 12 minutes of manager training every 6 months. Organizations with 100 to 500 employees provided just 6 minutes. Across the pond in the UK, a long-term research project commissioned by Middlesex University, sampling 4,300 workers, found that 74% felt that they weren't achieving their full potential at work due to the lack of development opportunities. And a more recent survey conducted in 2022 found that 8 in 10 managers believe training is beneficial to attract and retain talent. And many employees agreed that training opportunities were a factor in choosing their current company. More than 3/4 of employees say that they are more likely to stay with a company that offers continuous training. As you can see, there doesn't appear to be enough training being provided despite an expressed desire and benefit as expressed by employees and HR managers alike. I want you to retain these stats for later use as they'll become important later in the presentation. Let's now understand the central question of today's webinar, the problem of finding that sweet spot of training. So we know based on the stats that training is important, and given the little time afforded to training, it becomes increasingly important to ensure whatever training that is offered is maximally retained. But what often happens is that you forget most of what you learned. So let's consider a really common workplace scenario, the rollout of a new HR system. The project team diligently works through the project development phase to collect end user requirements, perform unit testing, do end-to-end testing. Things are going really well, really smoothly. The team's hitting their planned dates, and they're on track to hit their May 8th go-live date. So they predictably and understandably schedule training across the enterprise during the week of May 1st. That's 1 week before the May 8th rollout. And this, again, is a very, very common scenario. May 1st rolls around, and the training team hits the entire organization with really insightful and useful training. The attendance and engagement during the training session is great. Everyone leaves the session with confidence and certainty that they know how to navigate the new HR system with ease. However, a few months down the road, on July 1st, we have Hank. He's from sales. He's looking to submit a vacation request for the first time in the new HR system. That's a full 2 months after he completed his training. Can we predict what will happen with Hank? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Hank is going to forget where to go to access the HR application. He'll then stumble around trying to locate where that menu icon is for vacation request. And if he manages to find that icon, he'll probably forget how to enter the vacation into the system. The training that Hank had back in May has long receded in his memory. Sure, there are user guides available, but therein is another problem. Where does he go to find those user guides? So at the heart of this problem is our natural propensity to forget. So let's take a deeper dive into the phenomenon of forgetting to better understand the variables we need to take into account when we're trying to find that sweet spot of training. So let's take a quick step back in history to the late 1800s, where a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus pioneered the experimental study of memory. Ebbinghaus was fascinated by why we tend to forget things and how it can be prevented. Like many scientists of his day, he conducted the experiment on himself. Ebbinghaus memorized a large number of abbreviated words like ABA, CAF, those type of words, and he examined how many he could recall at different time points. The results were rather remarkable, as he noticed a steep decay in the learned material within the first 24 to 48 hours. So although Ebbinghaus never lived to see his findings published, his work did set the foundation for the now famous forgetting curve. So what we're looking at right now is an adaptation of Ebbinghaus's original experiment, which depicts the retention of information over time. So on the horizontal axis, we've got time represented there, and on the vertical axis, it represents the percent of knowledge retention. So starting on day 0, Hank knows nothing. That's because it's before Hank's HR system training session, so he has no knowledge to retain. But if we move up the curve, it's in the training session, he knows 100% of what he knows. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a tautology, so let me after the training session, Hank has absorbed 100% of what his brain is capable of absorbing. It doesn't necessarily mean he's delivered in the training session. It just means that his brain, if you think of it as a sponge, that sponge has absorbed 100% of what it's capable of. If we follow the curve over time, we'll notice that at the 20-minute mark, Hank has only been able to retain 58% of. That's a 42% loss in what he originally absorbed. And if we continue down that curve, we'll notice that at recalled back at day 1. And now if we go all the way down to 31 days, we'll notice that Hank has only been able to retain 21% of what he originally retained. So I know that most of you are probably in a bit of disbelief that our brains are so sieve-like, but we need to consider that your brains are hard at work processing a multitude of stimuli from the environment. Everything from the most minute detail, like the type of font on this presentation, to the most pertinent, like where that vacation icon is located in the HR system. Your brain is hard at work, subconsciously prioritizing which pieces of information are important for recall and which pieces can be dispensed with. Unfortunately, the type of font sticks in your head because it reminds you of a presentation you delivered using the exact same font, but that vacation icon escapes you because it's not relevant to you at the moment. Some of you may be in a bit of disbelief about our brain's capacity to be able to retain information. So, what I'd like to do is to put this theory to the test. So, what we've got here is um, a QR code that I'd like you folks to scan with your phones. It will direct you to another Mentimeter, and you'll be prompted to enter your name. You can enter any name in there. Whatever name is entered in there is not a name that we can see. And what I'd like you to do is, based on the question prompted, can you select the answer select the answer that best aligns with the question. I'll open up the poll in just 1 second. So, all right. So the poll should be open, and you'll have 45 seconds to enter your response in, starting now. Last 10 seconds. Okay, time is up. So let's have a look at the results. So the question was, what percentage of employees indicated that training was a factor in choosing their company? So out of all our respondents, we've got one that was able to select the right answer, which was 48%. So it was a little bit of a psychology experiment that I wanted to play to sort of articulate that degradation in memory retention when we're learning things. So this was just a neat way to sort of articulate that our brains do have a tendency to forget. But rest assured, there are ways that we can approach this so that we can maximize our retention of information. So let's turn now to the variables that support learning. So beginning with task complexity, the more complicated a task is, the greater the cognitive effort is required. So when you consider something like learning how to use a new HR system, there's a lot of steps and complexity involved in in remembering all that stuff. So one way to help address and support learning is to decompose complex tasks into smaller chunks of information so that they're a little bit easier for your brain to be able to process them. So this can look like instead of having maybe a 3-hour marathon training session, maybe you can decompose those into smaller sections over a longer period of time. This will also connect to another one of our learning variables that we'll get to momentarily. The next one is around proximity to application. So this really is at the heart of the issue we're talking about today. So what we want to do ideally is be able to move the application of the knowledge we're retaining to its application. So this can happen in a variety of ways. One of them can entail getting your training participants to be in the driver's seat when they're doing the training. So instead of it being a more passive thing where they're just learning about the system, put them in the driver's seat with them clicking around and actually exploring it. And the other way to be able to address this is, again, trying to schedule the training to as close to when they're actually going to need the to apply the learning. Relevance of knowledge here is key when you're considering who you want to invite to your training session. Oftentimes, it's easier to just invite a whole group or a whole department into a training session where maybe it's not as pertinent for everybody in that session to be there. So what's important here to consider is making sure that the people that are attending your training session need to be there and are the ones that are the right audience. Approach to delivery speaks to how you intend to deliver the training. So with virtual training and asynchronous training, there's a lot of options available to folks to be able to deliver their training. So for example, a very common delivery mode given the post-pandemic scenario is to deliver training virtually. Another common practice is what's known as computer-based training. So that's where there are a series of modules in a application that you click through, answer some questions. The best approach that we recommend is a blended approach where you've got synchronous training, so that could be virtual or face-to-face, combined with some asynchronous training. So having a place where there's resources for folks to be able to click through and refresh their memory on some of the things that they learned during the face-to-face training. Existing workload, everybody is inundated with work nowadays. So one important thing here is to try and schedule your training around lower workload periods. So for example, maybe your target group is particularly busy at the end of the month doing payroll or what have you. Instead of scheduling your training during that week, think of perhaps scheduling it the week after, where people are less likely to be distracted by work that they need to do, or writing emails while they're in the middle of a training session. Motivation is a really interesting one. It's at the nexus of organizational change management. And I say that because we'll see a lot of the variables related to, let's say, communication, training, resistance management come to coalesce here. So part of the function that you need to perform ahead of training is to be able to create awareness amongst folks as to the importance of the change, making sure that they understand why we're implementing the change. And this speaks to motivation. When you are delivering your training, you need people to be able to exude a sense of interest and desire to be there. And part of that is the work that you do ahead of your training to ensure that people are excited about the change, they understand the importance of the change, so that when they enter that training session, they're motivated to learn about what they need to do in order to be able to adopt the new change. Our seventh variable is the context for learning. This one's a bit of a tricky one, but one that we'd like to mention nonetheless. So the context in which you learn something is very important. In psychology, there is something called encoding specificity theory. And essentially what it states is that the internal and external context of individuals can aid in their knowledge recollection and productivity. So if you consider, let's say, you're delivering the training in a particular meeting room, maybe that meeting room is a place where people will often congregate in order to use a particular application. That can help aid in learning because your brain is coding the environmental factors as part of what else is being delivered in that training session. The last one, and possibly the least popular one, is training repetition. And I say it's probably the least popular one because there is a sense of novelty that people like to encounter when they're doing training. But important here is multiple exposures to the. What's really key here is being able to expose people to what the future state is going to look like as often as you possibly can, in terms of remembering, but it also puts in people's minds what the future state is going to look like. So this here is here and ties very nicely to task complexity. By breaking up a complex task and repeating periods can help boost people's knowledge retention and awareness of the change. Some practical examples now that we've got a solid theoretical understanding under our belt. And we're talking specifically about the rollout of, let's say, a software implementation or even a skills rollout. So typically we've got, the various stages of the project lifecycle, product development, UAT implementation, go live, and system application. So in a traditional model, the training typically happens just before go live. And we saw that earlier when we were plotting out the issue with timing of training. So this is a very traditional model, and we've seen sort of the weaknesses inherent in it. There's also a dual delivery model, and what that entails is the folks that are going to be part of the training session during the go live are also recruited to be to participate in user acceptance testing. Now, what's good about this is, if we go back to our learning variables, is training repetition. So folks are getting multiple exposure to the same technology or the same change that they're going to adopt. It also helps with motivation. Folks that are brought in as part of user acceptance testing feel that there is a need for them to be there, and again, increases their motivation to learn and to be able to retain the knowledge. So again, this is great. It gives more exposure, but there's still an even better model that we can consider. So this is a progressive model. And the way that the progressive model operates is we're doing training. I'm going to put training in quotation marks here. At each stage of the product development lifecycle. So again, we talked about what it looks like in user acceptance testing, but in implementation, what we're doing here is we're doing things like roadshows. So that could be anything like even like a 10 or 15 minute demonstration just to show people, hey, this is what your new application is going to look like. It really helps in many ways. One of them, it creates excitement. So it speaks to the motivation component of learning. It also speaks to the exposure and training repetition. The more often people get to see the application, the more familiar they'll get with it. And then, of course, we've got go live. So during go live, of course, we can arranged training at that point, talked about that as a sort of a standard practice. The next part here is once you've completed go live and the application is now live, it's good to now then schedule training at very strategic points. So this can look like something like an open door where you set up a time where people can just come into a meeting room where you'll walk them through a training session, or it could be quick 30-minute sessions where you're featuring maybe a particular training module. Maybe it's the, how to put in your HR, your vacation request, as an example. So having them available and spread out again really speaks to breaking down the task complexity, the training proximity, so making sure that that time between when they learn the information and when they apply it is as close as it could possibly be. So it's our recommendation that we perform the progressive type of model delivery with clients. Again, part of the rationale behind this is if we're looking at a traditional model and we're doing training just once, and folks are, maybe we get them for a week of training, and then a month down the road, they've kind of lost all of what they retained during that session. So what that often means is retraining. But it also means that folks are not going to be adopting the changes that you've been looking for them to adopt because they don't know how to use the skills that they had learned. So there is often a need to do a lot of retraining, relying on a heavier reliance on your user documentation as well. So with that said, what I'd like is to activate the Q&A session right now. So, okay, so if I could get the Q&A session activated, it'll just take a second while we get that set up. Okay, so you should be able to see the Q&A option available for you now. So we'll wait for folks to put their questions in the Q&A section. Okay, so we've got one question coming here asking which aspects of the training variables does Docanish employ in their practice, and how much more benefit does it provide compared to a traditional model? So I'll answer the first question first. So which aspects of the training variables do we employ in our practice? So we employ all of the variables in our deployment of training. The secret recipe, though, is how to balance all those variables because it's not always feasible to be able to have, training at a specific time for everybody. So really the secret is around how you balance them. We'll prioritize certain variables over others. So, for example, proximity to application is one that we would prioritize, let's say, over, the timing, for example. So in that case, it comes with experience as to which ones you need to be able to prioritize and which ones you can maybe allow to not emphasize. And the second part of that question, how much more benefit does it provide compared to a traditional model? The benefit is significant. So when we talk about people adopting change and acquiring new skills, by taking into account all the variables and incorporating it into a more progressive model, what you're getting is people more bought into the process, adopting change faster, getting a faster return on investment for your strategic objectives. In the traditional model, what you'll typically find is there may be shortly after go live, you may get a peak of adoption, but then you'll see that it starts to drop off because folks just don't know how to use the application or the knowledge that you train them on. And what that then requires is refreshers. And, so you end up having a slower adoption of change when you use the traditional model. So the next question here is, according to the progressive model, we should provide training at multiple stages, but how feasible is this? So this is a great question. So the feasibility of it is when you think about, sure, you can time your training. At one stage for a week. You do it, and then after you kind of walk away from it. So from a cost perspective, that's probably more cost effective. But here is the catch here is that the quality is going to suffer. So if you want to prioritize, a week of constant training and, the time taken to do that over the quality, that's one aspect of it. The other thing, though, is there's ways to sort of optimize the training that you do deliver. So if I go back to our example of delivering training over a week, well, instead of allocating a full week, you can break that up over time, and you'll get far better benefit by breaking it over time than just trying to concentrate it on a week or a single day. Thank you for that question. Next one, based on different variables that were explained, which one would you say is the most important in an industry setting? I would say that it's a good question, actually. In an industry setting, I would say that repetition and task complexity and proximity are the most important ones within an industry setting. Again, to me, those are the variables that will give you your biggest bang for buck. And so that, I think, are the top three variables that I would prioritize. Okay, and moving on to the next question. Does the timing of training impact resistance that you might face from stakeholders? That's a really good question, actually. So yes, it does. So if you consider the scenario where the group that you're going to roll out the change to have never seen, let's say, the new HR system. So you've been tucked away with the development team and the project managers and the BAs to create this really remarkable HR solution. But the folks that see it is a week before go live, you're going to receive resistance because they may tell you things like, oh, this isn't going to work for me. Understand it. So your tendency to get a lot of resistance during the training session is going to be heightened if exposed to the change that you want to roll out ahead of time. And so again, it goes back to that progressive model where if you're then there's a tendency for them to get accustomed to the change that they're going to need to adopt, but it also that you're going to receive in rollout, and gives you the opportunity to here. How can we implement change and training in terms, I believe, in terms of sales representatives? So this is a really nice question. So I assume here when we're talking about sales representatives, we're asking specifically about for people that are in the sales world. Um, so I think what is helpful when it comes to sales is having a lot of, I would say, like mock type of training. So in that sense, what one thing that could help is, let's say you're a sales company for hair products, for example. I don't know why I don't have hair myself. I don't know why I thought of hair products, but that's not important. So one thing that you can do is to have the sales folks practice their sales pitch with people that are not part of the company, to see and refine what your sales strategy is like. So that's one tactic that you can use to kind of help train sales representatives. Okay. So we got a few more questions that just popped up. So how do you deal with changes to implementation schedule impacting training already giving, pushing out when the users would actually make use of the tool and their training on it? Sorry, I just need to reread the question. How do you deal with changes to the implementation schedule impacting training already? Okay, so the question here is, when you have an implementation schedule that's changing, how do you then adjust the training so that the training is responsive to when people are actually going to use the tool? So in that scenario, again, given the progressive model that we've sort of proposed, you're not waiting for a single point in time to deliver your training. This is a more adaptable approach where exposure is happening on a cadence or on a frequent basis, so that you're building up to training and building up their knowledge base over time. And so if you do get, let's say, a delay in the go live, well, leading up to that go live, your audience has been exposed to training on more than one occasion, whether it's through a roadshow, whether it's been doing a demo in front of them, or even having them as part of UAT testing. So this is very adaptable to schedule impacts. Okay, so the next question we have: in your experience, how many months after go live should we continue to be deploying training? This will obviously fluctuate depending on what type of change you're trying to roll out. So typically 1 to 3 months. Usually, I'm looking at sort of the life cycle of the business process. So usually things turn over on a monthly basis. So like reporting is done on a monthly basis, payroll monthly basis. So I kind of work in those chunks. So like one to business and what it is that we're rolling out, but a rough guideline is around that, just to do it around business cycles. Next one is, how do you balance the need for continuous training and a limited budget? So this is similar to a previous question that we got. So I'll just kind of reiterate based on the previous question. So if you take, for example, a training where it's supposed to occur over a week. So, and let's say it's 40 hours of training. Well, instead of allocating that 40 hours of training right in that 1 week before go live, well, you can break that up over time. And breaking it up over time is going to give you a better result than if you just focus it on a small time period. So that's one way to be able to maneuver within a limited budget. Other options are creating computer-based training that allows folks to be able to access training sort of on demand, if you will. So that's another option if you're working within a limited budget. Okay, so the next question here is, what is your experience with informal training like shadowing instead of structured training, as platform policies seem to outdate the trainings and it is hard to keep up with updating the training? Yeah, this is a good question. So I think here we're kind of edging into the space of mentorship, and when we talk about job shadowing, and in our experience, like particularly within Docanish and Company, we really do highly prize the mentorship element of things. So it's not that we're focused on a particular day where we have a explicit training module that we need folks to complete. A lot of it is mentoring, that constant sort of support, advice, in order to be able to see improvements in how we conduct our business with our clients. So informal training, in many ways too, happens all the time. When you think about it, you're constantly learning when you're on the job, whether it's picking up how to use Excel in a new way, or how to deal with a client in a better manner, or refining your soft skills. I think that's kind of part and parcel of your daily sort of life. And so, yeah, certainly the informal training has its benefits, I think, by just the ease and speed of delivery that it's happening, and also the fact that it's you're able to do it at a low cost. A lot of times it's a lot of just advice giving in that capacity. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their questions. I think we've gone through all the questions that were asked. So I want to thank everybody for participating and in the session. And thank you as well for for providing your feedback. And like I said, at the conclusion, when you exit the webinar, you'll be given a survey. It will only take you 1 to 2 minutes to complete. It's only a few questions. And if you'd like to get in contact, my contact info is my first name dot last name at docanish.com, or you can go to the docanish.com website to get more information and to reach out to us. So thank you once again, everybody, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.